It was autumn in Warsaw, 1939. Leaves fell on the cobblestones of an ancient city where Poles and Jews, Christians and those of the Jewish faith had lived side by side for centuries, where faiths and languages intertwined. Irena Sendler worked as a social worker in the city's Department of Health. She was 29 years old, and every day she saw the faces of people in need. When German forces entered Poland, Irena's world turned upside down. Her father, a physician, had died of typhus before the war, having contracted it from patients he treated in the poor Jewish neighborhoods. Before he died, he told his daughter words she would remember forever. "If you see someone drowning, you must try to save them, even if you yourself cannot swim." Those words became her compass during the years when humanity itself became a crime. In the autumn of 1940, the Nazis forced Warsaw's Jews into a separate district of the city. High brick walls rose where ordinary streets had been. Barbed wire stretched along the tops of the walls. Armed guards stood at the gates. Hundreds of thousands of people found themselves trapped inside those walls, cut off from the rest of the world. Among them were thousands of children. Irena obtained a pass into the ghetto through her work. Officially, she was inspecting sanitary conditions and monitoring the epidemiological situation. The Department of Health feared that diseases from the ghetto might spread to the rest of Warsaw. But when Irena first passed through the ghetto gates, she was seized by horror at what she saw. Thousands of people lived in inhuman conditions. Several families crammed into a single room. Food rations were pitiful. Children begged for bread along the walls. She began bringing food, medicine, and clothing into the ghetto. The money came from friends and acquaintances in the Polish underground. Irena joined an organization that helped Jews called Żegota. It was an underground group of Poles who risked their lives to save their neighbors. In occupied Poland, helping Jews was punishable by death, not only for those who helped, but for their entire families. The Nazis made no exceptions. In the summer of 1942, deportations began in the ghetto. The Germans said people were being sent to work. In reality, the trains went to Treblinka, a death camp. Irena understood what was happening. She knew there was almost no time left. She made a decision that changed everything. The children had to be saved. The hardest part was convincing parents to give up their children. Irena walked through the cramped apartments of the ghetto and spoke with mothers and fathers. She could not promise that the children would survive. She could not guarantee that the parents would ever see them again. She could only say that here, behind these walls, the children had no future. Mothers wept and clutched their children to their chests. Fathers stood with stone faces. Some agreed immediately. Others could not bring themselves to decide. And there were those who refused until the end. Smuggling children out of the ghetto had to be done in secret. Irena would arrive in the ghetto by ambulance or truck. She hid infants in wooden toolboxes. Older children she placed in sacks, supposedly filled with clothes or food. The smallest ones sometimes had to be sedated with drops of valerian so they wouldn't cry at the checkpoint. One cry could mean death for everyone. Irena had a dog that she brought with her. The dog was trained to bark at the German guards at the gates. The barking drowned out any sounds the hidden children might make. The guards grew accustomed to this dog and this woman who regularly passed through the gates. Routine dulled their vigilance. Some children were led out through underground passages. Warsaw had an old sewer system with wide tunnels. The underground resistance knew these routes. A child would descend into the cold darkness, wade knee-deep through filth, and then emerge through a manhole somewhere on the Aryan side. Someone would be waiting there. Every rescued child needed somewhere to go. Irena and her colleagues found Polish families willing to take in Jewish children. They found convents where nuns hid little ones among the orphans. They found shelters whose directors were willing to take the risk. Children were given new names, new documents, new histories. 7-year-old Moish became Marek. 5-year-old Sarah became Zofia. They were taught Catholic prayers. They were told they must forget their past to survive. But Irena did not want the children to lose themselves forever. She devised a system. On thin strips of paper, she wrote down each child's real name, the names of their parents, and the new name under which they now lived. She rolled these papers and placed them in glass jars. She buried the jars in a friend's garden, under an apple tree. She believed the war would end someday. She hoped she could give the children back their names, their histories, their families. The work continued day after day. Each rescue was a separate operation, requiring planning and luck. Irena worked with a network of helpers. There were drivers who transported the children. There were nurses who prepared false documents. There were priests who baptized Jewish children to give them protection. There were ordinary Varsovians who opened their doors to unfamiliar children. The ghetto gradually emptied. Thousands of people vanished into freight cars heading east. The walls of the ghetto still stood, but inside them, less and less life remained. Irena kept coming, kept searching for children who could still be saved. Every day could be the last. Every child could be the last chance. The winter of 1942 was harsh. The cold cut to the bone. In the unheated apartments of the ghetto, people died from the freezing temperatures. Irena would arrive and see corpses in the streets, covered with newspapers. Among them were children. She worked faster, more desperately. Time was running out. In the spring of 1943, an uprising broke out in the ghetto. The remaining inhabitants took up arms and fought the German forces. They knew they were doomed, but they chose to die with weapons in their hands. The ghetto burned. Smoke rose over Warsaw. Irena stood on the Aryan side and watched the fire. She knew that behind those walls there were people she had not managed to save. She knew that the parents of children she had smuggled out were still there. That autumn, the Gestapo came for her. Someone had informed on her, or the Germans had identified her through other arrests. They seized her early one morning and took her to Pawiak Street, to the prison. The interrogations began. The Germans wanted to know the names of her associates. They wanted to know where the children were hidden. They wanted to know everything. Irena remained silent. They beat her. They broke her bones. She lost consciousness from the pain. When she came to, the interrogation would begin again. Her legs were broken so badly she could not stand. Her hands were mutilated. But she did not give up a single name. She was sentenced to death. The date was set. Irena knew she would soon die. She thought of the apple tree in the garden, beneath which the jars of names lay buried. She thought of the children scattered across Poland, living under false names. She prayed that someone would find those jars, that the children would learn who they were. But Zagota did not abandon her. The resistance fighters gathered a large sum of money. They bribed one of the guards. On the day of her execution, as Irena was being led to be shot, the guard led her away. He listed her name among those already executed. Officially, Irena Sendler was dead. In reality, she was hiding in Warsaw under a false name. Her legs never healed properly. For the rest of her life, she walked with a cane, feeling pain with every step. But she was alive, and she could continue her work. Until the end of the war, Irena hid but did not remain idle. She helped coordinate the rescue network, passed messages, found new hiding places for children. Warsaw was a dangerous place for underground fighters, but she stayed. In 1944, an uprising against the Germans erupted in Warsaw. The city fought for 2 months. The Germans crushed the uprising with monstrous cruelty. Warsaw was virtually wiped off the face of the earth. Irena survived this too. She hid in cellars, moved from ruin to ruin, and stayed alive. January 1945 brought liberation. Soviet forces entered the devastated Warsaw. The war was drawing to a close. Irena dug up the jars from under the apple tree. The papers had survived. The names were intact. 2,500 names of children she had saved. The difficult work of searching began. Irena traveled to convents, orphanages, and villages. She searched for children by their new names so she could tell them their real names. Many children did not remember their parents. The youngest had been mere infants when they were rescued. They had grown up Polish, Catholic, with different names and different memories. Some children Irena was able to reunite with surviving relatives, but there were few of these. Most parents had perished in Treblinka or other death camps. The children remained orphans. Many of them left for Palestine and later Israel. Some stayed in Poland, in the families that had taken them in. After the war, Poland was ruled by communists. Irena's heroism was not celebrated. The authorities did not want to speak of Polish-Jewish cooperation. Her name was silenced. She lived quietly, worked as a social worker, and raised her children. The pain in her legs reminded her of the past every single day. Decades passed. The world changed. Poland became a different country. In the 1990s, the story of Irena Sendler finally became known to the world. Journalists found people she had saved, now elderly, living in different countries. They told their stories. They remembered the woman who had given them life. Israel recognized Irena as righteous among the nations. Poland awarded her its highest honors. She was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. Those she had saved came to her home in Warsaw, they and their children and grandchildren. They embraced the old woman with the cane and wept. Irena received them with embarrassment. She said she had not done anything special. She said many others had done the same. She said she only regretted those she could not save. Until the end of her life, she was haunted by the feeling that she could have done more. In 2008, Irena Sendler died in Warsaw. She was 98 years old. Hundreds of people came to her funeral. Among them were those she had saved as children, now elderly themselves. There were children and grandchildren of those she had rescued. There were simply people who wanted to pay tribute to a woman whose life was an act of heroism. She was buried in Warsaw, the city she never left. A city that was destroyed and rebuilt. A city where the walls of the ghetto once stood and where memorials now stand. A city where, beneath an apple tree in a garden, jars containing the names of children were once buried. The story of Irena Sendler is a story about how one person can change the world. It is a story about how, in the darkest times, there are people who carry light. It is a story about mothers who gave their children to a stranger, believing in a miracle. It is a story about children who lost their names but kept their lives. 2,500 children survived because of her. They grew up, started families, had children of their own. Their descendants today number in the thousands. They are all alive because once in Warsaw, there was a woman who could not walk past another person's suffering. The apple tree in that garden died long ago, but a new one was planted in its place. It grows and blooms every spring. Beneath it, there are no longer jars with names, but there is memory. Memory of a woman who believed that to save one life is to save an entire world. Irena Sendler never considered herself a hero. She was an ordinary woman who did what she believed was right. In a world gone mad, she preserved her humanity. In the hell of war, she carried hope. When death was everywhere, she chose life. Her story reminds us that evil is defeated not by loud words, but by quiet acts. That heroism lies not in glory, but in the daily choice of good over fear. That one person, armed only with compassion and determination, can stand against a machine of destruction. Warsaw remembers Irena Sendler. Israel remembers her. Poland remembers her. But most importantly, she is remembered by those who are alive because of her. Remembered by the children who became old themselves. Remembered by grandchildren who never met her. Remembered by all who believe that humanity is stronger than hatred. In the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem, Irena's documents are preserved. The lists of names written in her hand are kept there. The testimonies of those she saved are held there. Every name on those lists is an entire universe, a life that could have ended but continued, a fate that might never have existed but did. When people asked Irena why she did it, she answered simply. Her father taught her that you must help people in trouble. It was as natural to her as breathing. She did not understand how anyone could have done otherwise. In her final years, Irena received many letters. People wrote from all over the world. Those she had saved as children, now elderly, wrote words of gratitude. Their children wrote that they owed their existence to her. Teachers wrote that they told her story in schools. Ordinary people wrote that she inspired them to be better. Irena answered the letters when she could. She wrote that no thanks were necessary. She wrote that anyone in her place would have done the same. She wrote that the important thing was to remember those who did not survive. Her humility was genuine. She lived a long life. She witnessed the horrors of war and the joy of peace. She saw the ruins of Warsaw transform into a living city. She saw the children she had saved as infants come to her as gray-haired elders. She saw how the memory of war began to fade and how important it was to preserve it. Until her final days, her mind remained clear. She remembered every detail of that war. She remembered the children's faces. She remembered their names. She remembered the fear of mothers giving up their little ones. She remembered the cold of the prison cell and the agony of torture. She remembered the joy of liberation and the bitterness of loss. Her life was a testament to the fact that even in the most terrible times, a person can remain human, that mercy is possible even where cruelty rules, that light can exist in the darkness.